Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Sid here from 3 Mississippi. Thanks for clicking on the video. Today I've got about 5 Muscovy ducks that I need to process out. So I'm going to show you how I do it and take you through it step by step. It's time to get a little messy, y'all. First things guys, I like to have some disposable gloves, a separate little container with a lid that I can use to put the heart and gizzard and any other pieces that I want to save like that in, several sharp knives and my scalpel with a couple additional blades, a good pair of shears, a thermometer. Of course, I'm going to need my lighter to start my scalding water pot flame situation, some Dawn dish soap to add to that water, some salt, and ice to add in my cooling station here in my cooler, and of course my propane tank and my trusty scalding pot. I also like to keep some bleach wipes around so I can sanitize everything before I get started. You're also going to want, of course, your trash can and some extra bags depending on how many birds you're doing. And I've got my restraining cone here. I'm just going to grab some baling wire. I like to be able to wrap their legs up. And of course, you also want to make sure you have a water source. I also like to keep a fly swatter handy, guys. The weather today, it's pretty cool out. I don't anticipate a lot of flies. However, every time you process, you tend to draw in meat bees. And I don't like them, so I like to be able to whack them. First thing I want to do, guys, is get my scalding pot ready. Now, since we're doing ducks, they are waterfowl, so their feathers are really good at keeping out the water. So I put a lot more Dawn dish soap in the scalding pot when I'm doing ducks because of that. This really helps get in between there and loosen up the follicles. It's going to take a while for this pot to come up to temperature, so we're going to get it started now, and ideally I'm going to want it at about 160 degrees. Got my pot full of soapy water with the lid there. Time to get the propane lit. We got our ice and our salt, adding our water so we can put the bodies in there. Guys, while that water's heating up, I'm going to go ahead and explain a couple things to you. The kinds of duck we're doing today is called a Muscovy. They are known for their really dark red meat. When you process them, their breasts look just like steaks. It's amazing. It's one of our favorite things to do is to cure those duck breasts. Mike's really good at doing that, and it is chef's kiss. I started a batch of Muscovies several months ago, and I ended up with about 7 drakes, 2 of which I am not processing. They are very friendly, they're very sweet, they are nice big boys. By all accounts, they are going to be good breeders. Physically, they were what I was looking for in breeders. So I'm hanging on to those 2 and keeping them with my hens. The remainder of the drakes, one of which is quite small. In fact, I almost at first didn't realize that it was a drake because it was so much smaller, but I guarantee, I'll be surprised if I open it up and it's not a drake, but it's a very diminutive drake, if you will. But I do have several other hefty boys in there. What I like to do when I'm processing birds, outside of meat chickens that are already kind of separated because they are in their chicken tractor out on the pasture, is I like to go ahead and separate them a day or 2 ahead of time. I usually go in at nighttime, pull who I need to pull, and then put them separately. So I did that the other day with these guys. So for 2 days, they have been, if you can see that hoop in there, my drakes have been sitting in there. And I did not feed them today. We like to process with an empty crop. It makes life a little bit easier for everybody and keeps things a little bit more clean. They have, of course, had access to water the entire time. You don't have to do that. It's just the way that a lot of people, including myself, prefer to do it. Now with ducks, as I mentioned, during the scalding process, because they are a waterfowl, even though they are technically a bush duck, and technically, if you want to get really technical, they're not actually a duck at all, but that's a story for another time. Muscovies are very unique, and their feathers are very dense, and just like any waterfowl, water rolls off a duck's back, right? So you really want to make sure you get that scalding water nice and soapy and the right temperature so that you can really get down there and penetrate the follicles to help loosen the feathers, especially if you're hand plucking. I know a lot of people use the wax method. We do not do that. We do it by hand. Now these guys are basically all white. They do have some black on some of their heads, but they are basically all white in this group. So they're going to be a lot easier to pluck in the sense that you won't see the little remnants in the follicles. But after the meat is chilled, it's always easier to go back and the goosebumps kind of happen. And you can kind of get the rest of those little pin feathers that you missed during the first round. Important thing to remember is once you're done eviscerating and that meat is ready to go into our iced and salted down cooler, you want to remember 4 and 4, okay? You want to get it down to 40 degrees within 4 hours. That's going to make it safe. So you want to get that water nice and cold. You want to keep it nice and cold. If you have to add more ice, do that. And you want to get it down to 40 degrees internal temp within 4 hours. That's the golden rule there for processing your poultry. We like to leave them sitting oftentimes at least overnight if we can, so that the remainder of the processing or bagging will happen tomorrow. Sometimes we will shrink wrap birds whole. I think Mike is planning on breaking these guys down further, so we might actually let them sit on the ice and just keep adding ice. It's very cool out, so we probably won't have to add as much ice this fall, but we'll probably leave them out here for maybe 2 days in order for the meat to really fully relax and chill out before he goes to actually break it down. Then we're going to be using the majority of the carcass and the bones to make stock, and then we'll be left with those wonderful breasts. I have a lot of people tell me that they're intimidated to process their own animals or they're unsure how to do it. Let me tell you, the first time you do it, yes, it can be a little bit daunting and a little bit overwhelming, but practice makes perfect. It does take time, just like any new skill. It takes practice and it takes learning and it takes watching other people do it and then trying it yourself. So if it's something that you're considering within your homestead realm, I definitely recommend giving it a try. Watch a few different people's videos on processing duck and look, there's definitely different techniques. We're going to show you the way we do it today, but you may find somebody else's channel that does it slightly differently that you like better. That's cool. There's more than one way to skin a cat, or in this case, pluck a duck. But either way that you choose to do it, just know that you are capable. Don't be overwhelmed. I know a lot of people that are starting homesteads and farms, and they find the processing and the butchering part to be daunting, scary, overwhelming. Don't let it get to you. You are capable of doing it, because if I can do it, you can do it. Now I've got a bucket that I just placed underneath here to catch the blood as it drains. All I'm gonna do here, I've got his legs bound so he can't kick out. This is gonna help him from keeping the meat getting bruised. And I'm just gonna make 2 slices across his neck here. Now, once the deed is done and they are draining, I like to let them sit for several minutes after the last rattle. That is totally normal. Don't be scared of that. That is just the body's reaction to shutting down with the lack of blood. And things are not firing like they should be. So that's just a normal reaction, so don't be startled by that. I like to wait till it's been a couple of minutes since the last rattle, really make sure it's had time to drain. That's gonna make for better meat that has been properly released of the blood before I move on to the scalding process. Of course, if you wanted to as well, you could always just use your shears and remove the head at that point. If you wanted to, you're gonna have the same effect either way, but with the heart still pumping, you're gonna get more of that blood out through that artery. coming out pretty good. I usually do about 20 seconds and then pull it and check it. I like to start at the legs and part of the wing that we're keeping. These last pin feathers out, which are always a pain, but some of these can be removed after the meat chills in the cooler with the ice and salt because they'll shrink up and they'll be easier to pull out. So what we're going to do with this is Mike's going to go ahead and finish eviscerating it here, and then what we're going to do is, you can see there's still several pin feathers on there. Once this has a chance to relax in the ice, before we actually process out the meat, he's going to be curing a lot of this meat and we're going to be making stock. So at that point we can then remove the rest of the pin feathers once it's nice and cold. This is why a lot of people use the wax method. We just don't, but especially since we're going to be curing and it's got to rest for a couple days in the ice chest, this is going to be just fine. All right, so right here in between the vent and basically the breastbones, there's a little flap of skin you can pull up, and he's making an incision there. Careful not to cut the guts on the inside, and he's going to widen that a little bit all the way to the other end of the U shape in that bone right there. And once he's got an opening, you can see the gizzard there. He's reaching in there to free up the fascia and connective tissue that's surrounding all of the innards, all the guts, the heart and the kidney, and, well, the kidney's buried, but the liver. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the head, and this will allow him to free up the crop and the esophagus on the top half here, making a little incision into the neck skin, and again freeing up that connective tissue of the crop. Now his crop is going to be empty because I don't feed ahead of butchering. So his crop's going to be in some ways harder to find, but easier to then separate and less mess if it pops.
Yep, there it is.
He was the one that did eat a few bites when I put food down to grab him.
It's worth noting that there's nothing gross in the crop. Like, it's not poop.
Right. It's literally, like you can see, it's undigested pellets. I literally scooped him up as soon as he swallowed a little bit of food and just grabbed him.
Crop is normally not this adhered to the skin, so we're showing you a challenging one here.
On ducks it can be a little bit trickier, but
I'm going to go ahead and cut off. Normally I would pull that crop straight out the back end, but since I've got a mess here, I'm going to go ahead and cut that off.
I like to keep a clean workstation in between and hose off frequently while we're working. Now he's got that esophagus loosened up on the top half. Now we're going to spin it around to that incision he made. He's going to finish breaking up the fascia and connective tissue, pulling those organs and intestines out. And there goes the esophagus right out the back.
And there comes the crop.
There we go.
Okay, so we've got everything except for the lungs and kidneys hanging out the back now. So this is where there's several things you can do right now. Some people like to save that butt nugget right there because it's a lot of good fat for stock. I am actually going to just remove it just like this, and I'm leaving the end of the intestine, the end of the colon here, attached to the cloaca, Okay. So the idea here is I don't want any of that poop.
And the reason he's removing the entire tail like that specifically is because there's a preening gland on the back side of the tail, basically on the opposite end of the cloaca, kind of.
Back here.
That little nubbin.
It's nasty.
It's nasty. You don't want that.
Now, we are going to be making stock, so we do want to keep the gizzard. Gizzard is good for stock, so what we got to do is we've got to get that disconnected. Liver's kind of semi-attached here, but that's just connective tissue you can pull off like this. And then the other side is attached right here. If you see this green gland attached to the liver, if you're going to keep the liver, do not pop that green gland. That's your bile duct. That's how your liver secretes bile into the intestines, and whoo, is nasty. I guess we'll keep the heart for stock too. All right, so the liver has this bile duct attached right here, and you do not want to cut that. So I'm taking the liver in a couple of pieces and leaving myself plenty of room along that bile duct. All right, what's left inside here, guys, is the lungs. I don't know if you can see way up here, all the way up here, along this side in the rib cage is the lungs, okay? Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna reach our fingers into the crevices between those ribs and scrape those lungs out, okay? Wish we could get a camera in there with our fingers, but we cannot. Voila, lung. Okay, now maybe you can see the difference between one side and the other inside there.
You can see the ribs on that side, and then that side you can't see the ribs. That's because the lung's on there.
All right, the next thing you got to get out there, see the kidneys? They're buried down inside here. They're kind of flush, but you got to stick your fingers down inside and pull them out. See if you can see. I push my fingers down into the crevices and pull these kidneys out, and they will come out in pieces. Pretty much everything about a duck is harder than a chicken or a turkey. Now we're going to spray this out real good. A little bit of velocity. Just going to check the other end, make sure I don't have anything unsightly up here. It all looks good. That bird is clean. So now we're going to take the feet off. I'm just going to put a little pressure against the joint like this, okay? And then I'm going to see where that knuckle kind of rounds down. I'm going to follow it down and cut just like that. And then give it a little pop. And you're just disarticulating this joint. You shouldn't have to cut any bone. Same thing, a little bit of pressure like this. Right on top of that joint, pop, follow it around. Normally I would get rid of kind of this top section of wing. There's no meat there, but since we are going to be making stock out of this, I'm going to leave them on for now because there is a little bit of bone in there.
And we're going to leave the neck on as well, but if you were keeping this to process from like a whole bird, you would generally remove that neck.
Yeah, that neck right there, I'll cut that neck off when I'm getting ready to make the stock, and I'll go ahead and braise it first before I add it to the stock, all that meat there. But that bird right there is ready to go in the cooler.
So guys, that's how you do it from start to finish, from the beginning of the process to the end for this lesson of just getting it into the ice bath. Like I said, with our Muscovies, we do like to let them rest in the ice for a couple of days. We will be curing those breasts. I'm sure we will be doing some video on that as well. But It's one of my favorite things, and we're going to then be making a giant batch of stock. So more things to get on our shelf to get us through the winter is always exciting, because I don't know about you, but in the winter, I love a good soup. So I always love having options for the stock on hand, and the Muscovy stock is amazing, guys, and I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, stay blessed and safety's off. And if you didn't hit that subscribe button, what the duck were you thinking?